Not going to do that because I will never hear the end of it, right? So I will. I know the ladies, and you're preparing lunch. I hope you'll stay for lunch. I've just got a feeling that these mountain mamas are going to be able to cook, so it's going to be good. So look forward to lunch. All right, we're picking up on our second session on 5 things that Christians should know about depression, and so in 2020, I was finishing up my book tour, or part of it, most of it, and about every weekend, traveling here and there and everywhere. And the last stop was a weekend. I was going to speak in Murfreesboro at this big woman of faith conference and on depression. And my son Austin went with me and set up our book table and all this, and did my lesson that weekend. So that was on Saturday morning. Saturday evening, we went to Creve Hall Church of Christ, a large church in Nashville, and was to do a seminar that evening. So went there, started it out, and Saturday, Sunday. In fact, that same weekend, they had a tornado come through in the middle of that week, and so they were doing all this tornado work in Middle Tennessee. Several people have been impacted. Sure enough, get through that weekend. That was right, I think it was like March 10th. The next day, the world shut down with COVID. And Frida Hardeman shut down. They said, hey, well, we're going to take 2 weeks on spring break. And well, we never came back from spring break. But the world shut down. And I just think about the many ways that we're living in a new normal right now with COVID-19, and how that impacted us in many seen and unseen ways. And there's still residual issues, right? There's still a lot of folks that are very afraid of being in large crowds. A lot of people around our country and around the world have not yet returned to church. They might be doing live streaming, and I'm glad we can do live streaming. We do that at Bethel Springs. But a lot of people have not returned. And, I just think about our kids that went through this. And Missy was teaching or doing school counseling at the elementary school. And remember the kids with their little masks going to school. And those masks were filthy by the end of the time. I remember they would eat their masks. They were, it was just like, oh, just get rid of the masks. Those are just grossing me out. But it did impact. And so I just think, just really quick, as we think about some of the elevated stress, and the elevated stress is still there. And I know there were members of this congregation directly impacted, and probably, I think I heard a couple that maybe passed away from COVID, and my heart's with those families, and not forgotten. The anxiety and fear that was just elevated around the country, around the world. Social distancing and diminished physical contact. That was tough. I'm a hugger. Man, I did not like not being able to hug people or receive hugs. The masks, something that I hadn't thought about on this, and the masks were pretty useless, it turns out, but not being able to see people's smiles. When we see somebody smile, it releases feel-good chemicals, right, in us. And so we weren't able to see people's smiles with those invisible smiles. We could see their eyes smiling. Mental or just physical health struggles and isolation and quarantine. And when we came back after the summer of 2020, I hated it, but I was having to teach a lot of my classes just on Zoom. I might have 50 kids in a class, and at any given time, a third of them would be out they would have COVID. They'd be out at the youth camp. So they were at the youth camp, and I was in class. I never saw their faces. I didn't know what they looked like. In fact, a year later, when the masks came off, students would come up to me, "Hey, Dr. Fraser," and I'll be like, "I got no idea who you are." I'd never seen their face. It was just interesting, some of the impact of the disruption of normal routines and practices, spiritual and religious angst, and political angst, of course, and financial stress as people who had just started businesses, like maybe a new restaurant, they just opened up and that just went down the tubes, right? And then sociocultural conflict and politicization. So all these things that just within the last few years, let us not forget, and these things have impacted, and there's a residual impact. There's a residual impact even today with depression, anxiety that was heightened. I saw a lot more clients during that time, doing a lot of telehealth. People that were just really mentally and physically struggling, and maybe still are to different degrees. And we still see masks occasionally and things like that. But these challenges that contribute. And so we're coming back on depression, and I'm going to try to present some of the things will be a little bit of overlap, but there's going to be some other things that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Just this epidemic with over 300 million people dealing with this mental health disorder. In the U.S., 1 in 10 adults, so again, 18.8 million struggle with a diagnosis. And millennials having just escalating over the last few years with diagnosis on depression, adolescents, that growing. So among teenagers, teenage anxiety, but mainly depression. By the way, let me clarify too. Sometimes clinically with my clients, they come in presenting with depressive symptoms, and there's often an anxiety aspect to it. But I'm always trying to figure out with my counselees, is it the depression that's the primary diagnosis and it's maybe causing some anxiety type symptoms? Or is it the anxiety that's the primary symptom and it's primary issue and it's driving some depressive symptoms? There's often both, but you're going to be barking up the right tree with treatment, medication-wise, and treatment plans, and just thinking about issues that people are up against. So there's a differential type of diagnosis. And then there are others that struggle with depression, but they don't struggle with anxiety at all, right? Or they have anxiety, but don't struggle with depression at all. So one size certainly does not fit all. So some causes of teenage depression. Fragmentation. Our kids these days are fragmented in our society. Their lives often feel not very cohesive. Their family life, their church life, school life is split asunder. And so there's not continuity in their life, and they feel fragmented in their identity and in their psyche. Saturation. So with our kids these days, they're saturated with all sorts of messaging on social media. Social media is not good for kids, I'm telling you. It's addictive, it impacts mood. It's not really good for a lot of us adults either, quite frankly. Whether it's looking at TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, just been saturated with these messages. So I'm going to ask you, what are some of the messages, and some of our young people that are in here, if you're a teenager, please speak up. Set us straight, us older people in here. What are some of the messages that our kids or teenagers are getting today from the world about themselves? What is the world telling them about who they are and their identity? That what?
It can be whatever you want it to be.
Okay, the world can?
No, their identity.
Oh, your identity can be whatever you want it to be.
If you want to be a boy today, don't be a boy.
Okay?
That's what they're being told.
Yeah, if you don't want to be a human, be a cat. A unicorn. Yeah, there are a few unicorns going around. All right, so just identity. Yes, ma'am. Say that again. Violence. Okay, being saturated with the violence. Sexual violence, other types of violence. Yes. More. Okay, and so maybe they might, depending on the kid, all right, and I don't want to talk too general because there's some great teenagers, great ones here today, but sometimes the sense that the world revolves around me. I'm the center of the universe rather than God being the center of the universe, okay? Or I'm the center of my family's universe. Let me tell you something. This is extra right here, but in your families, in your marriages, God first, marriage second, kids third. You get that confused, you're going to have problems. God first, marriage second, kids third. Keep that order. All right, what else? No one likes me. I'm sorry. No one likes you? I like you. Okay, but no one likes me, okay? That sense of how can I fit in? I feel all alone. I don't have any friends, real friends, okay? Yep, what else?
Take care of number one first.
Okay, take care of myself first. Maybe it's a survival instinct to some degree. Okay. Being bullied, yeah. So bullying, especially cyberbullying, the stats, and I've got a whole presentation on this I'm not going to do this weekend, but the stats on kids that are cyberbullied or bullied on social media, you know the risk for suicide attempts increases 400%. 400%. Okay? There was somebody else back here. Missy? I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Okay? Yes? Okay, I've got to be extreme to be noticed. Yes? Body image. What's considered beautiful? All right, though, thankfully there's a bit more variety now than there used to be. You don't have to look like Twiggy to be beautiful anymore, right? But yeah, body image is huge, and that impacts a lot of eating disorders. A lot of girls, and some boys these days, but deal with anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa issues. These guys over here are 100%. Y'all are zero. The sheep and the goats, all right? Any thoughts on this side? Yes?
Brian, one of the points, the comments are being made there, I'm not good enough, I can't do these things. A lot of times they're being driven to believe that if they're not from a particular social skill, economic background, they're not going to be successful in life. If they're not going to be able to get the education or the jobs like the rest of the world has.
Okay, so depending on just thoughts about socioeconomic status and how that impacts your future. Good. Anyone else? Teenagers?
They lack manners.
Say it.
Lack manners.
They lack, can lack manners, yeah.
And they don't say good morning, hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. All right, beautiful accent. Mucho gusto. Me llamo Ryan. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at some of these thoughts. So saturated with these different views. Isolation. Kids these days are hyper-connected on devices, but they're not very connected emotionally. All right. So they might have tons of friends and followers on Instagram, on TikTok or other platforms, Snapchat. But as far as actually being in a real relationship, Bob and I were talking about this, or somebody else last night, just having struggled just communicating, just face to face, having actual real communication. So they're surrounded by technology, but maybe they feel very much alone and very much misunderstood, even though they might be surrounded by all sorts of kids. So oftentimes I'll walk in on a group of kids at Frida Hardeman. They're sitting around the table, they're all on their devices. And I'll just say, dudes, really? Put down the device, talk to each other like, yes, Dr. Fraser, right? So they put it down, but just that sense of isolation, and then expectation. Came up a moment ago, socioeconomic. Sometimes, by the way, sometimes these expectations are pretty realistic. They're pretty realistic about some of the expectations, like the economy and things like that, but sometimes there might be unrealistic expectations, like the world is fair and the world circles around me. That's an unrealistic expectation, right? So these things kind of come together as a Molotov cocktail. And so 5 things that Christians should know about depression. Some of them I'm going to move through quickly, but then I'm going to focus primarily on the area of service. All right, so hang tight. We're going to get into service and how serving is very powerful. I'd like to read just a clip from the beginning of this book right here, Overcoming the Blues, and just to get our thoughts going. This is from page 2. Talking about depression. Y'all ready? It resembled the story of the Jewish prophet Jeremiah, who was thrown into a waterless cistern and sank into the mire, Jeremiah 38. There was no way for him to get out. He needed help. Jeremiah was extremely weak, hadn't eaten anything in days, and couldn't feel his legs. He was stuck, and he knew it. How long would it take him to die in the solitary confinement of the dark cistern, cold and alone, in the mud, abandoned? The strength would not come from within. He had none left. Jeremiah would require help from above. So God sent Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian, a eunuch who was in King Zedekiah's house, to tell Jeremiah what to do. Ebed-Melech then came with 30 men. Jeremiah wondered if he was hallucinating. But when Ebed-Melech lowered down the makeshift fabric rope, he felt it. That cloth cord was his only hope of getting out of this death trap. But could he make himself do what he needed to do in order to help himself survive? Ebed-Melech was shouting, "Put it around your waist and under your arms." It all sounded so simple. So why couldn't he get his body to respond and do what his mind wanted so desperately to do? We've all heard it before. Just be grateful for the help. Take it and get better. Just put on your big boy, big girl pants and get over it. But how? When had everything become so difficult? Jeremiah was once a strong and vibrant prophet, and now the weight of the fabric seemed to crush him. But slowly he worked it around his waist and looped it under his arms, and then Ebed-Melech and his helpers began the slow and painful process of hoisting Jeremiah up and out of the pit. As he moved upward, he caught a glimpse of the cobalt sky and began to feel a small seed of hope growing within him. Have you been there? Or have you seen someone you loved sinking deep into the dark indigo and felt helpless? I have. I pray that you find seeds of hope to help your spouse, your co-worker, friend, parent, child, or even yourself. Like grief, depression moves through stages. You'll become familiar with different shades of the blue as you read this book. Let's begin with perhaps the most difficult part of your journey, caring for yourself. You see, often the one battling with depression is a good caregiver. They care for others, but they struggle with being on the receiving end of care. They find it hard to ask for help. Depression, like any illness, can affect anyone. The CEO who takes care of his business in his sleep. The mother who takes meticulous care of all her children's and husband's needs. The straight A student who serves on the student government. The nurse who provides excellent care to her sick patients, or the minister who looks after the spiritual needs of his congregation. I'm here to tell you something important. God has placed me here for this purpose and this time. You are a child of God. You are a son or daughter of the King of Kings. You are a promised gift to this world. Therefore, you are worthy of care. As we think about this, five things Christians should know about depression. First of all, we've touched on this briefly earlier on. I said symptoms not a depression of faithlessness. Depression is not a symptom of faithlessness. It's a medical condition if it's clinical depression, right? It's a medical condition resulting from an altered brain structure and chemical imbalances which should be treated as such. And the disease, it's a disease, may be inherited and passed down genetically from one generation to the next. I need to say something for clarification here, I think, just to cover the basis. Sometimes, and in my book, sometimes there can be a sin component. There can be, all right? I think about David with his sin with Bathsheba and how in Psalm 51 he's asking God for a clean heart and he's struggling emotionally because of that sin in his heart and in his life. And so that he's needing spiritual wholeness. So there can be that aspect, but that's not always the case, right? That's not always the case. And so one size does not fit all. Many Christians feel weak spiritually for relying on antidepressants. Depression can rob somebody of their spiritual peace, hope, and joy. It can erode their faith. Proverbs 17:22, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. More than 2 decades ago, I had an elder in the church come talk to me at my office in Texas. He's deceased now. Wonderful Christian man, loved him and his family, still do. He came and he said, Ryan, I need to talk with you. And I could tell by that he just looked broken. He looked so broken emotionally. I said, David, what do we need to talk about? He said, well, I need to talk to you about my depression. So I said, come on in. So we went to the library and shut all the doors and everything. And sitting across the table from David, I said, David, do you need me to put on my minister hat or my therapist hat? Because I was the preacher, he's the elder, right? He hired me. He said, I need you to put on your therapist hat. And I said, all right, duly noted. I said, how can I help you? He said, I'm thinking about stepping down from the eldership. We had 4 really good elders. Stepping down from the eldership. I said, why? He said, I'm struggling with depression. I said, so? He said, well, it just makes it difficult for me. Makes it difficult for me to interact with people, and it's just impacting me. My energy, my attitude, all this stuff. I said, first of all, David, you may not step down from the eldership. You may not step down from the eldership because of all the people in the congregation, you are one person that understands this malady, this issue, more than anyone else in the congregation. And we've got several people in the congregation that struggle with depression. Who better to help them and to meet their needs than somebody that's got firsthand experience? I said, number 2, we need to get you the medical care that you need. I said, have you been taking your medicine? He said, well, I stopped taking my medicine a while back because it makes me feel weak spiritually. I gave him a spanking right then. No, I just said, David, if you're dealing with depression and it's clinical depression, you've got to deal with it clinically. So let's get you back into the hospital to the doctor. Let's get this sorted out. We can talk then, but in this frame of mind, we don't want you to step down from the eldership. We'll give you a little time to get yourself back together. Sure enough, he served for another good decade as an elder. Great elder. He just needed to deal with the medication thing and get into his head that, hey, this is medical, right? And so if you're thinking about stepping down from a leadership position, please don't. Please don't. We need you. We need what you have to offer. Christians often feel guilty for their depression, and so they assume personal responsibility. This is the second thing. If only I had enough faith. If only I was a better Christian. If only I was more like Jesus, I wouldn't struggle with my mental health. Time out. Have you ever read about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? What was happening in the Garden of Gethsemane before the cross? What was Jesus experiencing in the Garden of Gethsemane? Incredible anxiety, right? Incredible anxiety. Why? Because of what he was about to face. Not only the physical pain, but to have the sins of the world put upon him, on the sinless one. It was so intense that his sweat drops was like blood, right? Maybe it was blood. Maybe his capillaries were exploding in his temple, right? But sweat drops like blood. If Jesus experienced that in his human form, let's not think that we're going to be immune from that. So, don't kick a dog when they're down either. Don't beat yourself up when you're down. So we're often good at beating ourselves up when we feel useless or feel unworthy of joy and maybe feel like complete spiritual failures. But you're in really good company. Maybe expanding compassion and patience to yourself is extremely important. Often leaders and people, kind people, loving, you all just look like great people here. You're probably really good at extending grace to other people, but not so good at doing that for yourself, right? Or self-forgiveness. So we need to help each other. Several faithful men and women in the Bible struggled. Moses, David, Elijah, who was actively suicidal, Jonah, Hannah, Ruth, Naomi, Mary, who was told that her heart would be broken, right, by the prophet when she brought her son, she and Joseph brought her son Jesus into the temple as an infant. Paul talked about his having anxieties for all the churches, right? And so Psalm 30 verse 5, David again talking about joy coming in the morning, but weeping tarrying for the night. And so that prayer, that psalm is infused with thankfulness and a hopefulness and a steadfast love of God. And so God is aware, God hears you, He sees you, He knows what's going on. And I think God's love and compassion is extended to us. An effective strategy for coping with the blues is to reach out to others and to serve selflessly. So I'm going to camp out here for a little bit with service, and I'm going to share some thoughts on this. And so this is not the end-all and be-all, but shifting your perspective from your own struggle to looking around you and seeing how can I serve, not in spite of my pain, but through my pain. How can I do that? How can I use that perspective to turn my attention toward others and their needs? Serving others, serving the Lord, it's not just a short-term distraction from anxiety or depression. It's our suffering. It's a restorative antidote. And so the presence of depression may serve as a doorway. So I want you to think about that if you struggle with depression. It's like a doorway that opens up some possibilities. The possibilities that it opens up is increased awareness, increased compassion, increased sensitivity to the pain of those around you. So really quick here, I'm going to walk through these really quick. 7 observations. This is not part of the 5, but it is part of the 5, right? But just 7 really quick observations about how serving others is a benefit to depressed Christians, how it can help you. Number 1, it refocuses us. It refocuses us, takes our eyes off our own pain, right, when we serve and we're volunteering to help others to the best of our ability, given limitations to energy and such like. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Matthew 20 and verse 28. And we walk in Christ's footsteps. Again, Matthew 20, 28. Number 2, serving others redefines us. So rather than being worthless and useless and helpless, we become useful and hopeful and helpful, right, to others. It changes our sense of, hey, I'm just dead weight to my family or to the church or my community. And so it redefines us. So I think about, again, Matthew 20, 25 to 27. But Jesus said to them, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever must be first among you must be your slave. He was saying the power of service that redefines who we are. Number 3, serving others reminds us. It reminds us. What does it remind us of? Well, it reminds us of the needs of others. It reminds us of our calling, of our mission as human beings and as Christians. And when Cephas and James and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given to me, Paul said, they gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and to the circumcised. Only they asked us to remember the poor. They asked us to remember the poor, the very thing we were eager to do. And so there's opportunities that we have that reminds us, hey, I'm struggling, therefore other people are struggling. How can I help other people? How can I serve? Serving others also refines us. In other words, it makes us grow. It makes us stronger, like going through the gold refinery, right? It burns away it burns away all the dross, so we come out refined and growing into maturity. Philippians 2, 3 through 8. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourself, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself. It's called the kenotic God. He was kenotic. He emptied himself. Taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So just amazing how we can be refined in this process. Number 5, serving others reveals us. It shows the world, it shows our family, it shows the church, it shows the community who we are. What makes us tick? What's a priority for us? What's really important in our life? Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. You're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. And so it reveals us. It lets our light shine. And then serving others reconnects us. What do we say about depression? Depression causes us to go into isolation, to crawl in a cave, to crawl in a hole, right? Serving others forces us to come out of the hole, leave the cave, walk out of the door, reconnects us to others. Galatians 5, 13 through 15. For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another, for the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. What does that imply? That we love ourselves. You can't love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. So take care of yourself. 1 Peter 4, 9 through 11. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to do what? To serve one another. As good stewards of God's varied grace, whoever speaks is one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves, I love this phrase. Look at this. One who serves by the strength that God supplies. Remember Paul again from 1 Corinthians 12 or 2 Corinthians 12? When I'm weak, then I am strong, right? So it's the strength that God supplies in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Serving others, number 7, it redeems us. Now, it doesn't mean that we're earning our salvation. It just redeems our story. It gives our life meaning and purpose. So 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 5. Blessed be the God and Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, the God of all mercies, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in any affliction so we can comfort those with the comfort we have received. Okay, so I was about to release my book, and I was doing a little trip down to Starkville, Mississippi. Starkville, Mississippi is where Mississippi State is. And I went to church on a Wednesday night. I had some friends there, and I was just trying to set some things up for a visit to Starkville later on. Wednesday night, go to church. One of my friends, Mark Castleberry, former board director at Freed, chairman of the board, he said, I want to introduce you to somebody. I was like, all right. So there's this man in his 80s that comes over. This man is about 6'8". By the way, the church building there is it's kind of incline. He was standing up, so it was like more like this. You know. The man shakes my hand. He says, my name is Bailey Howell. Bailey Howell? Bailey Howell? The Bailey Howell? The Bailey Howell that the road in front of Mississippi State says Bailey Howell Boulevard? That Bailey Howell? The Bailey Howell who broke all sorts of records in Mississippi State playing basketball? The Bailey Howell who played for the Boston Celtics? You mean the Bailey Howell that in the draft was second behind Wilt Chamberlain? That Bailey Howell? Afraid so. He said, Ryan, I want to tell you something about my story. I said, all right. Yes, sir. Tell me whatever you want. I'm scared of you, all right? By the way, Bailey Howell had served as an elder in the church in Starkville, a member of the church. Grew up in Middleton, Tennessee. Still has records. He still has records, even though he played like in the 50s and 60s, I guess. He still has records in Mississippi State. Before they even had three-pointers, he still has scoring and rebounding records, right? He took the Boston Celtics twice to the championship. He said, you know, all my life I played basketball. All my life I played basketball. That's all I knew was basketball. He said my identity was basketball. In high school I played basketball. I came to Mississippi State. I played basketball. I went played for the Celtics, and there were other teams he played for. Basketball. Played 12 years in the NBA. He said, I got out of the NBA. He said, I did not know who I was. He said, I got so depressed when I got out of the NBA. He said, I stayed in my house in bed for about 6 or 7 months. I mean, this is a nationally renowned, big name in basketball, NBA. I did not know what to do. He said, Ryan, one day He said, I decided I can't do this anymore. I can't stay in bed anymore. I've got to get out of this house. He said, so what I decided to do, now he was in his 30s at this time, right? Probably mid to late 30s. He said, I decided to start helping the widows in the community. And so I would take my lawnmower and I would mow their grass. And I can't imagine. Can you imagine the little widow lady looking out? And there's Bailey Howell mowing the grass, right? He said, that was the reason it got me out of the house, serving. He said, I would do whatever they needed me to do. I'd rake their leaves. I would, clean their gutters out. And I wasn't too impressed by that because he didn't even need a ladder. He just had to do that. He didn't even need a ladder. It's like, that's not a big deal. I mean, come on. But he said he found his identity. He refound himself, and he had lost himself. He refound himself in serving. Later on, became again the elder in the Lord's church and served for many years as an elder. I thought, what a testimony. Bailey Howell, And so, thinking about that, and when I told him about the book, I didn't even tell him what the subtitle was. Finding Christ-centered hope and joy through serving others. I was like, I guess I'm batting down on the right thing, of serving. But that's such a powerful antidote. A powerful antidote to dealing with depression. Serving is a spiritual strategy that should not be overlooked when someone's facing depression. It should not be overlooked. Okay. It's essential, as we wrap things up, it's essential to respect your own limitations, though. If you're dealing with actual depression, clinical depression, you can't just put a Band-Aid on it, right? There are definite restrictions to your physical and emotional energy. It's important to maintain a healthy personal and family boundaries. Sometimes you got to say no, right? You can't do everything. Missy's really good at saying no. She's had to learn, and I've had to learn to accept that she says no, because there's a reason she says no when she can't do something. We know our limitations, and proper preventative medical care, speaking to a doctor, meds if necessary, competent clinical counseling is all helpful, and the way God provides His grace. So respect your limitations. Never give up. Never forget that God's got a hold of you. I want to tell you something on myself on this. As the book was about to come out in 19, and then the second edition, which this one is in 20, I sometimes write little articles on my professional Facebook site. So I had that. I wrote this article, and I made a comment in the article that I got corrected on, and I needed to be corrected. I was wrong on it. I wrote on it, I said, never let go of God's hand. Never let go of God's hand. One of the readers of my article commented. They said, hey, I don't want to be disrespectful. I really like the article, but just one thing. So, I was open to it. He said, just one thing. He said, I've dealt with clinical depression for many years. And they said, there are times I felt so beaten up by myself and by others within the church for my depression. He said, something you said in your article was, never let go of God's hand. The respondent said, there are times that I don't have the strength to hold on to God's hand. He said, I've realized that God's never going to let go of me. God's got me. God's never going to let go of me. So you might just think about that. So I said, point taken. I went in and changed the article. God's got a hold of you. God's never going to let go of you. Even when you don't feel the strength to hold on. It's like the footprints in the sand. God's carrying you. God's carrying you. Seek godly counsel. professional care if need be, support from brothers and sisters in Christ. We're not an island. We need help. Thank you all so much. This has been great. We're going to do lunch. I'm going to turn things over to this good brother right here, and we'll